Oh, he is. You know,
Lights out.
Well, it's actually Windows 10. It hasn't been updated to 11 yet.
Yeah, that's the.
Which is that, I didn't tell IT a couple days ago, so hopefully they're able to do that, but. But that's why it's finding us today. Actually, the clerk hasn't really kicked off the network yet. And it's,
I might be able to, laptop as long as it's.
yeah, do that. Whenever we just, you need to mind switch.
Well, actually, if you're on there, because since we're both on Teams, it'll probably still show up on the screen.
Well, this is pretty. Oh, is it gonna work?
They lose, but they lose by on the
Yeah,
other
it does not like.
20.
Okay.
Is it on your computer?
Just pull up the,
Yeah, they do.
Teams meeting.
God did they though.
No, it's, we're sharing screens. So you're
Okay.
Well, I don't think they got that. I don't think.
Okay, go ahead and bring your computer up here.
He didn't.
It should have enough battery.
What will we do with that first time? Kristen, your sweater's.
Oh, thank you. It's very cozy.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna plug this into your HDMI port on that side. Thanks, guys. Go ahead. So it should be.
Turn it on her voice.
You don't need to do it.
It's like,
I need to check.
actually,
I always love the question about it.
it's telling me that the best teams are the ones that buy their quarterbacks. He bought their quarterback and said they got. See, it's helping you. It's great college football.
Okay, go ahead and open it up.
I might be cheaper, but I think.
No, you're fine. It's a little tight. It is what it is.
And he has all the connections.
Okay, and you're gonna have to share your teams, your screen from Teams, that way they can over here.
Yeah, we still have the mic on there, right?
Yes.
So,
He might be.
Yeah. So share your screen.
What hurt him, I'm not an expert, probably stupid.
I would do entire
I think
screen.
what probably hurt him when he didn't start when he made the touchdowns. He played under the fella for 20 years.
And that's
That's cheaper on the bench.
all right. Yeah, you're good.
Third year there.
Is that what you're used to?
He sat the bench for 2 years. He didn't get any experience. I don't think that
It's
is.
not showing full screen.
Oh, do you want to go to display?
Yeah, I would have.
Because if you're not used to presenter view,
Maybe you can come to that with things that work.
There we go. Yeah, that's what I want.
there we go. And my
Okay.
pointer won't
Yeah.
work for you, but.
Yeah,
You've got
because,
enough for that.
yeah, this will work so the people on there can hear that. Okay. And,
We got it playing for Kentucky.
and I think everybody can,
Kentucky.
Yeah, it's showing your screen, which is why it's showing up on that one as
is
well.
that sound on?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Okay.
Is it? Let's,
Yeah. It's showing it's on. Okay.
okay.
So, all right. Well, sorry about that technical problem there. I want to present today, I'm going to do the Civil War in Kentucky. I'm going to focus on local and close sites that could be done in easy day trips. And I'll interject a couple of other things along the way. So the first thing I want to do is in 1860, before the war starts, what does a map of the United States look like? Probably the first thing that jumps out at you is a lot of the western areas are still territories and not states yet. The eastern United States looks very similar to today, but I don't know if you can see this. West Virginia is not a state yet. It's still part of Virginia at that point. It's going to become a state during the Civil War in 1863, and I'll cover that a little bit. Okay, so in November, during the presidential elections, 1860, Abraham Lincoln wins, and the Confederate or the southern states at this point are very upset about this because they believe he has abolitionist tendencies, and especially South Carolina was extremely angry, and they decided that we absolutely refuse to have President Lincoln as our president. So they succeed, and over the next 3 months or so, 6 other states joined them. So this map, these kind of salmon-colored states are the first 7 states to succeed. So South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas immediately succeed at this point. Okay. Next thing here, this shows Fort Sumter, which is in Charleston Bay, Charleston, South Carolina. And there's some other federal forts around the coast of Florida down here. But you can imagine when they succeed, say they're starting a new country, the army forts and stuff that are on the coast there, people say, well, who do they belong to now? And of course, the federal is saying, well, we're not giving up our forts there. And so the Confederates said they wanted Fort Sumter, but it was occupied by Union soldiers. And so the first shots of the Civil War were fired at Fort Sumter. You can see here, April 12th through the 14th, 1861. And so that was the beginning of the Civil War. And I love Civil War art. So here we see the cannonading of Fort Sumter. Now, this was considered a water battle because it was out in the middle of the harbor, and then the cannons were on the shoreline shooting into it. But the Federal Army in there, they didn't have enough supplies to hold out very long, so they were forced to surrender. So this was a Confederate victory. Now, the North was extremely enraged by this, and they said, we can't believe these southern states had the audacity to fire on a federal fort. And Abraham Lincoln calls for 75,000 troops to squash the rebellion. And he got those volunteers practically overnight. Everybody was so angry. Well, once he called for these troops, then 4 additional states succeed. So then Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Virginia also succeed. So now we have 11 Confederate states. And then what happens with West Virginia is it turns out the people that live in West Virginia have a lot more in common with people from Ohio and Pennsylvania than they do the plantations down in Virginia. So they actually get together and they meet in Wheeling, and they decide to succeed from Virginia back to the Union. So that's, and then officially become the state in 1863. So Virginia actually succeeds, or West Virginia succeeds from Virginia. So that's how all of that happens. But we have these now 11 Confederate states at this point. Very quickly, the Confederates elect Jefferson Davis as who would be the one and only president of the Confederate States of America. He rushes to Montgomery, Alabama, where he's inaugurated. That was the first capital, but it didn't last long. They very quickly moved the capital to Richmond, Virginia after that. So here, I wanted to show you one of the ironic things here is Abraham Lincoln and Jefferson Davis were both born in Kentucky, approximately 100 miles apart. When I Google mapped it, it came out to 124 miles here. But President Lincoln was born in Hodgenville, Kentucky. You see here, here's Elizabethtown, just a little bit southeast of that. So that's roughly a 2-hour drive from here. So that's pretty close. And here you see Mammoth Cave and I-65 over there. So that's very easy to get to. And then the Jefferson Davis birthplace is just east of Hopkinsville, about 10, 15-minute drive there. So from here, that's about a 45-minute drive down there. And and that is a state park. The Lincoln birthplace is National Park Service, and Jefferson Davis is state park there. So when I visited the Abraham Lincoln birthplace, my first surprise was I had no idea there was such a beautiful memorial there. It's like a small version of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. There are 56 steps here to represent the fact that he was 56 when he was assassinated. And then when you get to the top, you go around to the backside and enter the door. And inside the building is the birthplace cabin. So it's sheltered and protected there. And so that's really neat to see his birthplace cabin. Very nice little park. Now the farm there that his father bought was called the Dripping Spring Farm. And you can actually see the Dripping Spring, which was a very nice clean water source for them. So he had a good location. And it turns out that because they had land grant problems, that they lived there until Lincoln was about 2 years old. And then when he was 2, they moved about 10 miles away. It's still considered part of the same park here, but this is known as his boyhood home at Knob Creek. And this is the cabin he lived in until, from age 2 up until about age 7. After age 7 is when they moved to Indiana and then eventually to Illinois. Okay.
Did they have property dispute?
Yeah. Kentucky had horrible property disputes because there were a lot of land surveys that overlapped with each other. And so there were lots of argument. And so he lost his property. It actually happened to him twice there. He lost this one as well. That's why he went to Indiana. So Jefferson Davis there, the thing that surprised me was the large obelisk. I had no idea it was there. It's over 300 feet tall. And it's a beautiful little park. You can see the stone wall and everything. And then they have a museum. And then you can ride an elevator up to the top. That's the view from the top. A lot of agricultural farms there. That area is also very heavily Amish and Mennonite. So you'll see Amish buggies and stuff there. So, and again, so that's such a short drive. You can easily do that in a day trip there.
There's a church. You can see it from the site where the obelisk is. Where the church is, that's actually where Jefferson Davis is. That's where.
Yeah. And I know the actual cabin is gone, but you can kind of see the general area where around that church where he was actually born there. Okay, when you think of a Confederate flag, is this what you think of? This was actually the first Confederate flag. It's called the Stars and Bars. And it started out with the 7 states that succeeded. And then quickly they had to upgrade it. Now there's 13 stars on here. Remember I said there's only 11 Confederate states. So why is there 13 stars? Well, the Confederate states argued, they said, well, remember the Missouri Compromise? Missouri was entered as a slave state. They said we should have Missouri too. They never controlled it, but they claimed it. And Kentucky was a slave state. Kentucky did not succeed. And they said, well, we want Kentucky too. It's a slave state. Well, Kentucky actually vowed neutrality. They had nothing to do with this, you know. But the Confederates actually claimed them. So the 12 stars considered Missouri, and Kentucky is the 13th star. And actually, Kentucky ends up having a star on both flags. But again, we never succeeded there, and we'll talk more about that as we go. Okay, so after Fort Sumter, there were some small battles, but the first major land battle that involved infantry was the Battle of First Bull Run. And you'll see here July 21st, 1861. About a year later in 1862, there was a second battle called the Second Battle of Bull Run, but this is the First Bull Run, also known as First Manassas. Now, the reason for the multiple names is the North would call it one thing, the South would have a different name. The North usually named after a geological feature, so they named it after the stream, Bull Run. The South liked to name it after the closest town or city, which was Manassas, which had an important railroad junction, and that's why they were battling here for control of the railroad junction. Again, I like looking at Civil War art and saying, what is the artist trying to show here? Well, one thing I want to go back to the flag, the stars and bars. There was a famous Confederate general named Beauregard who he said that this looked enough like the regular American stars and stripes that from a distance it was hard to tell them apart, and it was causing confusion. And he's like, we need a different flag here. Also, at the beginning of the war, there was no rule or no standard uniform, so nobody decided the North will wear blue, the South will wear gray, and this caused for a lot of friendly fire incidents. And also the Southern Army was very poor, and so some of them had uniforms and some didn't. Some of them just wore their like hunting clothes, which was often made of deerskin, and this brown color was called butternut. And so when you're reading on the Civil War a lot, you'll hear that we saw this sea of gray and butternut coming at us. That's how they describe the Confederate Army here. Also, First Bull Run is where Stonewall Jackson gets his nickname, Stonewall. Now, he was actually wearing his coat from the Mexican War. So he was actually wearing a navy blue jacket and hat during this battle as a Confederate general there. So that's kind of the stuff that the artist is trying to show. And he led a bayonet charge that actually won the battle. So the Confederates win this battle. So 1861 is not going so well for the Union. The Confederates are winning all these battles, and Lincoln is desperate for a victory. Okay.
The flag that supposed to signify something, the left.
Yeah, right here.
Yes.
It just shows that there would be soldiers that would be killed, and if they weren't killed outright, they might be. He's probably asking for help or asking for water. So it's kind of showing the pain of the wounded on the field. And I've read stories that like when the sun would go down, the battle had ended, they could hear people crying out in pain at night, and they couldn't go get them, or they get fired at themselves. And at Shiloh, for instance, the wounded suffered all night out there. They could hear them crying all night, and so that's kind of what that's indicating. Yes, it was cold. So as I mentioned, Beauregard wanted the new flag. So then what we think of as the Confederate flag, and the reason it has an X on it is that is St. Andrew's cross. There's a tradition that Jesus's disciple Andrew, he didn't feel like he was worthy to be crucified like Christ was, so he asked for the cross to have an X shape to it. So that's known as St. Andrew's cross there. And they have the 13 stars. So one of those is Kentucky. Okay, so the first thing is that very quickly, and I didn't realize in the 1860s that it was still like this, but very quickly the war divides into two theaters, the Eastern Theater and the Western Theater. And because roads had not been well developed yet, they were mostly dirt roads. They were horrible in the wintertime when it was wet and muddy. And so, and even the railroads were still kind of in their infancy. So the way most people traveled were by river and, so in order to get from the Eastern United States to the Western United States, the two major ways to get there was either come down the Ohio River, because the Appalachian Mountains is the barrier here, or they're still using the Cumberland Gap as a major highway. And so especially for Kentucky, that was the two major ways there. And so Kentucky is in the Western Theater of the war. The Eastern Theater is primarily fought in Virginia and North Carolina and so forth, but we are in the Western Theater. Okay, now, next thing I want to show you is the Confederate defenses. So remember Kentucky about neutrality. Lincoln says, because it's his home state, he promises, well, we won't molest you in any way. Well, that was not a promise you could keep. Because if your army's here and you need to attack down here, you have to come through Kentucky. So the Civil War is coming to Kentucky whether we want it or not. But it was actually the Confederates that invaded Kentucky first. Over here in Columbus, Kentucky, there was a general named Leonidas Polk. He takes the town of Columbus, which is right on the Mississippi River, and it's up on these high bluffs, and he put 140 cannons there, and the Union would not dare send a boat past there. They were like, we will get destroyed. So this was an extreme fortress, but basically it meant that the Confederates violated Kentucky's neutrality first. So then when Ulysses S. Grant comes in, it's like he's the liberator. He's the savior of Kentucky. Okay. Right here, just across the line in Tennessee, the Confederates had Fort Henry and Fort Donelson. And if you're familiar with this area, that's that land between the lakes area, about an hour, hour and a half drive from here. So very close. Now, the general who was put in charge of the Western Theater was named Albert Sidney Johnston. He got stationed in Bowling Green. And then there's a Confederate general named Zollicoffer who immediately captures the Cumberland Gap to control that. Okay. So that creates a defensive line here for the Confederates. And then I want to show you the strategy that they're going to use to try to break this defensive line. Okay. So the general who is called General in Chief over the entire Federal Army was Winfield Scott. You may recognize that name. He was famous from the War of 1812 and the Mexican War. And he's a very elderly gentleman at this point. And so he proposes what he calls the Anaconda Plan, and he presents it to the Lincoln administration. He says, all we need to do to defeat the Confederacy is blockade the coast and then take the Mississippi River from them, and they won't be able to transport their goods, and they'll crumble financially. Well, the Lincoln administration, not just Lincoln himself, but his advisors and everything say, no, that's going to take too long. And so Winfield Scott was trying to prevent a lot of deaths of infantry soldiers. They're like, no, we need to take care of this quicker. So they tell him they reject his plan. But what's funny is when you start looking at the early battles of the war, they're basically doing that. The first thing they do is they blockade the coast. And when you look at what Ulysses S. Grant's going to do, he's going to try to come down and take the Mississippi River from them. The most famous battle is Vicksburg. There that eventually gets to. Okay, so I had trouble finding a map that showed the Cumberland and Tennessee River, so I drew these in. But there are 5 major rivers that play a role in the Western Theater here. And you have the Ohio River, you have the Mississippi River, you have the Missouri River, and then this is the Cumberland River and the Tennessee River. And again, they flow very close together right here, forming that land between the lakes area that we have in Kentucky. The Tennessee River flows in at Paducah, and then at Smithland, Kentucky, is where the Cumberland River flows in. So again, this is going to become very important territory for us. Okay. Now, a lot of colored maps, they'll use blue for the North and they'll use red for the Confederacy. So you can see here, the North controls the Ohio River. The Confederates never really did have control of the Ohio. They control the upper Mississippi, and then the Confederates here, I'll talk about the Missouri in a second. The Confederates have the Cumberland, the Tennessee, and the lower Mississippi from New Orleans up. Okay. Now, there was a general in St. Louis who was really on his toes. Later, Grant would actually commend him, say, boy, he really knew. But his name was Matthew Lyons. And he says, well, the first thing the Confederacy is going to want to do is they're going to capture the arms and ammunition here in St. Louis, because it turned out St. Louis was the largest army base in west of the Appalachian Mountains. It's called Jefferson Barracks, if you've ever heard that term in the St. Louis area. And that's exactly what happened. The Confederates sent an army up through Missouri, and Lyons went out and met them, and there was a battle of St. Louis, and he was able to defeat the Confederates and save the arms and ammunition from the Confederates there. And so basically what that does, that means that the Union controls the Missouri River as well. And the state of Missouri never did fall into the Confederacy there. So all that is Union. So the next thing we're going to see when Ulysses S. Grant comes on the scene, he's going to try to start taking this lower Mississippi and even the Cumberland, Tennessee rivers away from the Confederates here. Now, you could buy a book that's published by the National Park Service that shows all of the Civil War battles. They recognize 384 battles, which is mind-boggling. But and then they number them by the state abbreviation and then chronological order in that state. So the first battle, Kentucky 001, first battle in Kentucky is called the Battle of Barberville. And I had never heard of Barberville. I had to look it up on a map, but it's down here in southeastern Kentucky. Right here's the Cumberland Gap. And again, this General Zollicoffer, he comes up and he catches the Union Army there off guard. And it's a very small battle, but because he catches them off guard, he wins a pretty easy battle here. And then the Union, they have to retreat, and they retreat up here. If you're familiar with where London, Kentucky is, just north of London, there's a mountain there called Wildcat Mountain. And so they camp, we always say that you always want to control the high ground. So they set up camp on the top of Wildcat Mountain, and that's where the second battle's going to be. But last week, I took a little trip. Barberville was small, so they don't have a lot, but they do have a little city park here. And it's a real pretty little park, but this commemorates the Battle of Barberville. And when you walk around there, they have a lot of signs and historical markers that talk about the battle. And Barberville's, the surrounding area is absolutely gorgeous. It's in the Danville National Forest there, and that, but they do have a small park. Then you can see here, so here's Barberville. You go up past London to Camp Wildcat. This is going to be the second battle. And now this time the Union is ready for them. They know they're coming. And the Union actually wins this battle. They were able, because they controlled the high ground, they were very well entrenched, and they defeat the Confederates in the second battle. And so last week I was there. So at the top of the mountain, they have a nice little park. It's real pretty. Lots of wooded trees. The leaves are starting to change color. They have some monuments there and signs. But the best part of this was the drive up. Okay. You remember learning about the Wilderness Road? So when Daniel Boone cuts through Cumberland Gap, and then when that road goes from Cumberland Gap all the way up to Lexington, that was called the Wilderness Road. It's dated to 1795. This road is 130 years old, and you actually get to drive on it to the top of Wildcat Mountain. I was so excited. It's a gravel road mostly. They have some pavement when it's real. It probably has a 10% grade, and so they have some paved areas so you can get traction to get up it. It's a very steep road, but yeah, there's a reason I'm smiling there. That's because I was driving the Wilderness Road there. I just love that.
Is it just, like you said, is it just a gravel road?
Yep. There's a gravel road. It's hard to pass. It's kind of a one-lane road, but they have little pullouts where cars can pass. Battles 3 and 5, I have not been to, but this is called the Battle of Ivy Mountain. And you can see it's in extreme eastern Kentucky. So it's northeast of Hazard, southeast of Lexington, which the Red River Gorge is right here. And then right around the corner, there's another battle called Middle Creek. They're going to be taken here. I didn't have time to go up here. But now these two battles were important. The Union wins both of these. Now, remember I said that Lincoln was desperate for a victory. These weren't very big victories, but it turned out that the mountain people, the Appalachian mountain people that lived in eastern Kentucky and also eastern Tennessee, they were very pro-Union. They did not want to succeed. And the Confederates were so mad at them that they actually like lynched and did guerrilla warfare against them. And Lincoln was like, I want to protect these people. And so these battles were important because it helped protect the eastern Kentuckians from the Confederates that were doing guerrilla warfare against them here. Okay? Again, but before we get to Middle Creek, battle number 4 is called Rollitt Station. Now here's Mammoth Cave, Bowling Green, 65 going up through there. It's right off of Interstate 65. and this town's called Mumfordville. And so you have a battle called Rollitt Station, and then a year later you have the Battle of Mumfordville. So 2 battles here. So these are easily done in a day because that's less than 2 hours over there. Okay, but the important thing is there's a railroad bridge across the Green River here. Now for the Rollitt Station, it's really just a historical marker, but there is a battlefield for Mumfordville you can go into, and you can see this railroad bridge. Now, this is the modern railroad bridge, but this bridge was destroyed, I think, 2 or 3 times during the Civil War. So here at Rollitt Station, the Confederates destroyed the bridge because they didn't want the Union to be able to get their supplies across here. But my understanding is the pillars that are embedded into the riverbed are original. And so these are original Civil War pillars down here. And so that was kind of cool to see that bridge. And we'll kind of come back to that when we get to the better Mumfordville here in a second. Okay, I'm going to take a break for a second. A lot of you are familiar with the Battle of Sacramento here, about 25 minutes drive just east of here. Notice there's no number. I don't know why, but the National Park Service does not recognize this as one of the 384 battles, which is a shame, but they don't. But famous Confederate cavalry general Nathan Bedford Forrest came up through Sacramento, and I'll kind of show. Another thing they have out there, you start in Greenville and work your way up through Sacramento. They have a driving tour marked with these signs. There's like 10 signs. It's not very well kept up. I couldn't find all 10 of them, but some of them are marked there. So the story was he came up and there was a young girl, teenage girl who rides out on her horse and meets him, and she's pro-Confederate, and she says, hey, there's some Union soldiers just north of town. And she actually rides beside him out to show him where they are. And then he fires the first shot and engages them. And he surprises the Union. And he pushes them all the way up to the Green River there where Calhoun, where you cross in Calhoun there. Pushes them. They're jumping in the water, swimming across the Calhoun. And then he backs off from there. But Forrest wins this battle of Sacramento. And they have a reenactment in May. I was there in May for the reenactment. So
More people don't understand the reenactments that actually have more participants than in the actual original battle.
yeah, it was small.
That's what I understand.
Yeah.
It's actually a bigger, they have more people in the reenactments than the original battle
Right,
itself.
right. See?
So this is the closest to Madisonville, or is it battle? So was there any battle in Madisonville, or this is the closest?
But I'm not understanding what you're saying.
So out of all the battles in Kentucky,
Oh,
so was there any in Madisonville?
oh yeah, I'm coming to that. Okay. I have a little surprise for you here. Okay. So, but yeah, Madisonville was involved. And so you see the cemetery there? That girl Molly is buried there. So they have it marked so you can go see her grave there, the one that helped Forrest. Seeing you were just right in front of me here. Okay. So if this interests you and you would like to maybe start visiting some Civil War sites, I have 2 places you can go after work today to cross off. This historical marker is right across the street from CVS Pharmacy. And when you read it, you'll see here that Forrest raided in Madisonville. He captured horses, cattle, and hogs. Of course, cattle and hogs he used to feed his army there. But so he raids here, and basically that was the same raid when he came up through Sacramento there. Then if you go down to the old courthouse on Main Street, you see later in the war in 1864, the Madisonville courthouse was burned. And you probably drive by this almost every day, that monument. That's a Confederate monument to honor the Confederate soldiers. They're dead. You say, well, we weren't a Confederate state, but there were a lot of Confederate sympathizers in this area there. And so that's what that statue is. That's right outside the courthouse. So there's 2 for you. It's about a 10-minute drive. Okay, come back to number 5 is the Battle of Middle Creek. And again, that's right around the corner from Ivy Mountain over there, northeast of Hazard. But again, the importance of that was that they were protecting those hill people that were pro-Union So those were important little Union victories. Also, look who won this. Union General James Garfield, who would eventually go on to become president of the United States, right? So he was the head general of that battle. I did not know that until I read about it. Now, battle number 6 is going to be the most important one. Mill Springs. This is over by Somerset. There's a little town called Nancy, just west of Somerset. And this is a national monument, so it's run by the National Park Service. And this was the first significant, larger battle, and it was a Union victory. And so Abe Lincoln is like, finally, we get a significant victory here. Now, what happened, coming back to this General Zollicoffer, down here in Middlesboro, that's where Cumberland Gap is. Remember, he came up and attacked at Barberville. Now he has come up here, and he crosses the Cumberland River and attacks the Union Army here. And even his own people said, that's a bad idea, because you never want to put a big river at your back because you don't have a line of retreat. And he ends up getting defeated. Their retreat was a complete disaster, and they were almost wiped out by the Union here. But you can go there. And unfortunately, with the government shutdown, the visitor center was closed, but they have a self-guided driving tour you can do. So Zollicoffer is killed at this battle. And remember, this is still early enough that there were no standardized uniforms. So he sees a group of soldiers and he mistakes them for his own. They were actually Union soldiers. He rides up to them and starts giving them orders, and they look at him and like, we don't recognize you. Who are you? And one of his men runs up and said, sir, that's the enemy. That's the enemy. And so one of them pulls out a gun and shoots him right there. So that mistake cost him his life. And they have a little place there called Zollicoffer Park. There's a monument in his honor there. And then there was what was called the Zolly tree. It was a large oak tree that they laid his body against. That tree was blown over in a windstorm, but you could still see where the stump was. But, you know, to read these stories and then actually go and stand right there where they laid his body, that's pretty cool. And that, so that's at what's called Zollicoffer Park. And then also right there is a Confederate cemetery. And I don't know if you guys know this. I'm going to zoom in on that. But if you go to a Civil War cemetery, if it's Confederate, the tombstone will have a peak on it. If it's Union, it'll be rounded. Do you know that? Yeah. So this is a Confederate cemetery. And then this right over here is a mass grave. There's in this hole, they dumped over 100 unidentified Confederate soldiers in this mass grave right there. And when you start studying the Civil War, I don't know how many thousands of unidentified soldiers there were that, you know, I feel bad for their families because there's no closure in there, right? If their bodies were never identified. But that's right there. Okay, then you can drive down to the river where they try to retreat. And it's a beautiful spot. So here's where the ferry boats land. Now, my understanding is they only had 2 ferry boats, and you're trying to ferry about 19,000 people across. That's not going to work too well. And then here, over on the other side, you can see the ferry landing where they were going to. And this was called the Mill Springs Ferry. So that's why it's called the Battle of Mill Springs there. But that was where the retreat and the ferry site was across the Cumberland River there. And so that was a very significant one. And that was so remember 1861, not so good for the Union. This is January 1862. 1862 is going to look a lot better for the North. Okay, so I came back to this. So this, what has happened now that Zollicoffer, who was at the Cumberland Gap, has come up and been killed and defeated there. Basically, the right side of this line has been wiped out by the Union, and now they're going to attack the left side of the line here. So I have this marked. This is St. Louis. We saw that was a large Army base, Jefferson Barracks. Eventually, Ulysses S. Grant moves in there, and he's based there. And he moves down to Cairo. I don't know how many of you ever drive over and cross the river. You cross at Wickliffe and go right into Cairo, Illinois. That's an important site because it's right where the Ohio River flows into the Mississippi, that confluence there. And he sets up a base there. And then eventually he would go up to Paducah and set up a base in Paducah. So he's going to start attacking the Mississippi and the Tennessee rivers here. Now, I was very sad to find this out. It's just happened in the last couple of years. But what's called the Custom House Museum in Cairo, Illinois is like permanently shut down. You see, it was a beautiful building. It's falling into disrepair. When you walk around, you have to watch out for broken glass. The windows are busted out of it. But the desk that Ulysses S. Grant used is in there, and I'll probably never get to see it. I don't know if they'll move it to another museum, but that was his home base. And when you walk around outside, there is a cannon there that was used in the Civil War there. So that's called Custom House. So again, right across from Wycliffe, Kentucky. Okay, you probably heard of ironclad warships. The person who invented those was from St. Louis, a brilliant engineer named James Eads, and these ended up being very excellent ships. And the idea was that they would have iron armor, and the sides are sloped at a 45-degree angle, so if they get hit with a cannonball, it's going to glance off. And so it was very hard to get a direct hit on one. Plus, they had their own cannons, and they were very, very powerful ships here. So Ulysses S. Grant, he's going to have his first battle and his first victory at what's called the Battle of Belmont, which is in Missouri here. But so he comes up with this idea to use these ironclad warships. So he's over the Army. The commander over the Navy is a man named Andrew Foote. And you've probably heard that a lot of times two different branches of the military, they don't work together very well. Well, they actually became very good friends and worked in conjunction very well with each other. And so now I mentioned, so on this map, here's the Mississippi River. And on this side, we have Columbus, Kentucky. And you see the cannons here. So remember, this is up on these high cliffs, 140 cannon blocking the Missouri River. They wouldn't even dare go past it. You go across the river, you have Belmont, Missouri, which Belmont actually does not exist anymore because that mighty Mississippi changed its course and it wiped the city out there. But at this time, you had Belmont, and Grant said it's going to be easier to attack Belmont than Columbus. So he has it shows the ships here. They dropped off the infantry. They come down. They attack Belmont. They have a pretty easy victory, destroy the camp. And he's like, that's really all I wanted to accomplish. And then they start their retreat back. Well, over here in Columbus, they send reinforcements. So this is showing the reinforcements that came across. And then they start pursuing Grant. Now, before I go to the next slide, one other thing they did besides the cannons, they took a huge boat anchor and a chain, and they stretched it across the river to block boats as well. Just another reinforcement there. Huh? The Confederates. That's the Confederates. They're blocking the Union ships. This is the only real artistry work I've seen for this. So there were transport ships that brought the Union troops down. Grant was riding on his horse, and he's making sure they all get back on the transport ships, and he's going to be the last one on the ship. The Confederates are coming up here after him, pursuing him. He almost gets captured. And when he comes up to the shore to get on the ships have already pushed off and they're drifting away from the bank. Somebody throws a plank out. And one thing you'll find out about Grant, he's an excellent horseman. He gets his horse to walk up the plank and jump on the boat. And the men are shouting like, we've never seen anybody do anything like that with a horse before. And so that's one of his famous stories.
Didn't he jump a fairly wide gap over the river to do that?
Yeah, I would say probably over 6 feet. It had drifted away from the shore there, but they just could not believe that you could get a horse to do it. And Grant said, "Hey, it wasn't me; it was the horse." But that's a really cool story as well. I think they tried to put a crown on him or something. And I don't remember the name of that horse. His horse names are pretty funny though. His favorite horse was named Cincinnati, but he had a horse named Jefferson Davis. It's like, I'm gonna ride you, I'm gonna control you. And I love the Jefferson Davis horse. That's pretty funny. So in Kentucky, we have a state park called Columbus Belmont State Park. It's a beautiful little park here. But so here's the view from those high cliffs. It's called the Iron Bluffs. They're about 120, 150 feet. So you can imagine if you have 140 cannon up here, you're going to control that river. And I love the fact that there were some barges out here, so you can kind of see how they'd be sitting ducks if you tried to go past here.
Was that a Confederate thing?
Yeah, so this is the Confederate spot. And what's really cool is they have the chain and anchor right there.
Oh,
So to read this and be able to go over and touch that anchor and chain is just really cool. So they estimate that anchor weighed somewhere between 2 and 6 tons. It's huge. Yeah. Okay, so here's a map. So here's that Belmont battle. Now, because Columbus was so strong, they kind of bypass it for a little while. And so Grant decides to go from Cairo up the Ohio to Paducah. And there's actually a museum there where you can see some of the furniture he had in his headquarters there in Paducah. And so next they're going to tackle the Tennessee River. So here's that land between the lakes area here. And when you come, now this is actually upstream. You're coming up the Tennessee River. You have Fort Henry, which is in Dover, Tennessee, but it's so close to the state line, you throw a rock into Kentucky here. Okay? So they bring the ironclads up to battle Fort Henry. They lob shells in, and Fort Henry surrenders pretty quickly. It was not much of a contest. Actually, the general who surrendered, his last name was Tillman. He was from Paducah, and he eventually gets killed at Vicksburg. But if you go to Paducah, Tillman's a pretty common name over there. So he was the one who surrendered to Grant. Admiral Foote, the Navy, won this battle here. Now, Fort Henry was inundated when they built Kentucky Dam. It's underwater, so you can't really see Fort Henry, but there is a sign, and you can kind of go over where the general area where it's where the fort is, somewhere out there submerged under Kentucky Lake. There's a little Confederate cemetery there. These 5 soldiers were killed by that cannonade fire from the ironclads there. So I stumbled across that when I was over there. And after they capture Fort Henry, they send the ironclads. They keep going down, or actually upstream. It's south, but it's upstream. And they go to Danville. Now, the Confederates didn't have a lot of railroads, so the ones they had were very important. And so they blew up this bridge in Danville, Tennessee, to take out the railroad for the Confederates. They went all the way through Tennessee, all the way to Muscle Shoals, Alabama. And when they get to Muscle Shoals, the people of Muscle Shoals, please don't destroy our town. And they said, well, if you sign an allegiance to the Union, we won't destroy your town. And so Muscle Shoals surrenders. This is a huge embarrassment because they have penetrated all the way into the Deep South now here. So a huge Confederate embarrassment. Now you bring the boats back down, go 10 miles up to Smithland and start your way up the Cumberland River, and you're going to get to Fort Donelson. And Fort Donelson is a part of the National Park System. It's a great little park. So here we have the Cumberland River, the fort's right here, and what you're going to do is you're going to have your ironclads lobbing shells into the fort, and then Grant's infantry on the other side. So they're hitting it from a 2-pronged approach, attacking the fort here. So this is February 15th, 1862, and eventually the Confederates realize they have to surrender here. So again, here's another artwork. So here's Grant on his horse directing the infantry. Here's the fort. And then you can see the ironclads out in the Cumberland River out here on the other side, lobbing in from there. Now, Nathan Bedford Forrest was here, and when the Confederate generals meet, they say, we got to surrender. He's like, I didn't come here to surrender. And so he makes a miraculous escape. The only way he could escape, he took 400 cavalry. They had to cross this creek in February, it's sleeting, and the water was up to the horses' bellies, and they practically freeze to death, but he actually leads them out and they escape. And Forrest was a huge thorn in the side of the Union.
I'm surprised he didn't freeze to death.
Yeah, really. But Forrest actually escapes before the surrender. This is my lovely daughter at Fort Donelson, and this is the lower battery. And then I like the picture here. This is the upper battery. So imagine the Confederate soldiers here, and those ironclads come around the corner. And I like the fact there was a barge there. It kind of gives you an idea. But that's the view they had of the ironclads coming up at them. But they had such a good battery here that they tore the ironclads up. There were 6 ironclads. They destroyed 3 of them. And there was a 4th one where the boiler exploded. And so of the 6, they actually defeated 4 of them. So they weren't invincible, but they were pretty incredible ships. But boy, the Donelson battery just tore them up.
And they still lost, the Confederates still
The
lost.
Confederates still lost, even though they put up a good fight. And then the hotel in Dover is still there. This is the Surrender House. It's a little museum. You can go inside and look at the displays. But that's where they surrendered. The Confederate general who surrendered is General Simon Bolivar Butler. Does that name sound familiar? He went on to become governor of Kentucky after the war. He was really good friends with Ulysses S. Grant. He was hoping Grant would give him good terms of surrender, and Grant wasn't so friendly. He's like, well, so much for friendship. And that's but he ended up playing a major role in the war himself. But Butler became governor of Kentucky. Okay, come back to this map. So once you win at Fort Donelson, where does the Cumberland River go? It goes all the way to Nashville. And on the way, you come to Clarksville. So when they came to Clarksville, Clarksville was kind of like Muscle Shoals. They begged, please don't destroy our town. And they signed allegiance, and they're captured pretty quickly. But then they go on up to Nashville. Now, at this time, there's not a battle in Nashville. The Confederates withdraw. They're like, there's no way we can hold Nashville. And again, this is huge because Nashville becomes the first Confederate state capital to fall to the Union. And it was an industrial town. They didn't have a lot of industry. So to lose that industry was a huge blow. So this campaign was just horrid. Okay.
The South didn't put up a battle.
There was a battle of Nashville later in the war, but at this time there was no battle. They gave it up. They just withdrew from it. In 1864, there would be a battle at Nashville, but not at this point. So they just walked right in and took over here. So again, this Tennessee and Cumberland River, now you've taken that away from the Confederates there, and it's a huge blow. And what's surprising, remember, this is February 1862. If you had told somebody at this point that the war would go on 3 more years, everybody'd say, there's no way the Confederacy can last that long. But they did. But that's how big of a blow this was to them. And again, I love the fact that all of this is just right down the road. Again, you can get to Clarksville in about 40 minutes, right? By the way, if there is a park in Clarksville, it's called Fort Defiance. It's kind of a nice little visitor center. They have a nice movie, and you can see where the fort was and everything. So it's worth a stop if you're ever in Clarksville. Okay, I want to finish the. I'm almost out of time. I'm almost done, I promise. There's 3 more battles, real quick. So in the middle of 1862, there's a general named Braxton Bragg, and he decided we need to make one more push for the Confederacy to try to conquer Kentucky. We need Kentucky. And so he makes a push up here. He teams up with a general named Kirby Smith. Kirby Smith comes up and he went battle number 7. He wins the Battle of Richmond. So it's looking good for the Confederates. I was there, and they have, it's not a very big park, but they have a nice trail there. So I got a little bike ride in and looked at the monuments. This is the visitor center, which was closed. I think it's permanently closed. So some of these parks are not doing so well financially. here, but I believe that building was there during the war. Pretty building. Okay, then battle number 8 is that battle in Mumfordville that I told you about. So again, that bridge across the Green River was rebuilt, and now they're battling over it again. And Braxton Bragg comes up and he wins. This is a Confederate victory to get that. And there's a large stone monument. They say it's one of the largest monuments in the entire Civil War park system there. And a lot of the battle took place on this called the Woodson Farm. Now, if you stand here in the front yard and turn around and put the house to your back, this is the view. It's a beautiful view. And then I'm going to zoom in because it's hard to see, but right out here is that railroad bridge that I showed you earlier. So again, they're battling right here over that railroad bridge. And then the last battle, number 9 in Kentucky, last Civil War battle in Kentucky, is it's not only the biggest one in Kentucky, it's one of the significant ones in the entire war, Perryville. And Perryville is a state park, and it's not very far away. You can see it's just a little bit southeast of Elizabethtown there. So you could do that in a day trip if that was your main focus there. Again, Braxton Bragg was the general. And so what's interesting is he's outnumbered 3-1, but he's actually winning the battle. And so when the sun sets and they're like, okay, what are we going to do the next day? Well, he decides to withdraw. And Kirby Smith is livid. He's like, why are we withdrawing? We're winning the battle. And Bragg's like, well, the trouble is that we're outnumbered. This ain't going to last long. And we came up here to try to take Kentucky, get the Confederate sympathizers to join our side. And he's like, these people are not Confederate sympathizers. They're pro-Union. He's like, we're not getting any help from these people. There's no use battling here. So he withdraws and decides to go back to Tennessee and focus on Tennessee instead of Kentucky. And then there were some little raids, again, like Forest and so forth, but this was the last full-blown battle in Kentucky. And so at Perryville, I went there. They did not have enough room at the visitor center for a camper. Their little driving tour was on a gravel road, so I found a pull-off, and then I rode my bike back to the visitor center there. But you can see it's a real pretty area. And when you go down where I was there with my camper, that's where the Union Army was, up on top of the hill. And down at the bottom, it's called Doctor's Creek. And when you look up the creek here, the Union is up on this hill. The Confederates are down here. There was a drought, so this was the only drinking water available. The two armies didn't know they were so close to each other. When the Union soldiers came down to get drinking water, they ran into Confederates, and that started the fighting there. And and again, the Confederates actually won that day, but then they withdrew the following day. And then I love this view. This cannon was right on the horizon, and the wood fence just so it is a beautiful area. Okay, last slide. So we have lots of local Civil War history. You may not have realized there was so much so close to us, but we've got Sacramento. There's museums in Paducah. There's Columbus Belmont State Park, and they just had a reenactment a couple weeks ago. The land between the Eight Lakes area, pretty much all of that is Civil War history. Abraham birthplace there is a couple hours away. Mumfordville and Rawlett Station there, again, very close to Abraham birthplace. You can kind of do all that in one day. Jefferson Davis birthplace just down in Hopkinsville or east of Hopkinsville. Just across the river in Cairo, Illinois, there's not a whole lot there because the museum's closed, but you can kind of see the area. There's Fort Defiance in Clarksville, Tennessee. And then again, Dover, Tennessee is right across the line. So again, you got land between the lakes, Fort Henry, Fort Donelson. Again, Fort Donelson is National Park Service. And then Somerset and Perryville are not too far. So again, Mill Springs is National Park Service. Perryville is State Park. So all of that's pretty close, within 2.5 hour drive there. Okay. Any questions?
Interesting story about Perryville. General Bell, Lincoln was so ticked off that he didn't pursue the Confederates. he kind of fired, basically Bell finished the war in an office job in Indianapolis.
Right. Yeah, he was, yeah, I just read that a couple weeks ago, that he was fired for not pursuing Bragg.
In fact, you mentioned that they thought the war was going to be over. General McClellan single-handedly extended the war 2 to 3 years. He had multiple opportunities, greatly outnumbered, and he was afraid to fight.
Yep.
And had he been a Grant, the war probably would have been over.
Yeah. I know there was one battle where McClellan had over 200,000 men. Lee only had like 80,000,
Yeah,
and he wouldn't attack him. He was afraid. He just would not fight.
I can't remember which one. I want to say 7 Days War, but I can't.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, McClellan always said he never had enough guys, but he always had the Confederates outnumbered. But he wouldn't pursue. Even Antietam, the one battle he kind of wins.
Yeah.
He doesn't
He
pursue.
doesn't pursue. That's when he loses his jobs. But, well, thanks, guys. So grab some lunch. Don't forget faculty meeting at 1:00.
Ready to get.
All right. Thanks online there, folks.
Last one, I made it to some.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
It ended at 1860.
Oh, wow.
I never even got there. So that was how good that teacher was.
Yeah. Thank you, Roger. It was great.
Oh, thank you.
Very, very good presentation. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate you coming.
I grew up about 3 miles from Jefferson Davis Monument.
Oh, really?
So I've been there many times.
I had no idea that obelisk was there. I was like, oh, this is cool.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's a nice little place.
I grew up, outside Columbia, Tennessee, in the town of Southfield, New Hampshire.
Oh, okay.
So, we always, every couple of years, it felt like they took us to the, Battle of Franklin location.
Yeah, I've been trying to hit some of that stuff. I want to take my kids to the Carter House there.
Yeah.
And, but I went down and finally saw the Confederate Museum where Nathan Bedford Forrest is buried, and saw his grave. And, but there's a lot of stuff down there with,
If you ever go that direction, let me know. I can tell you